Let's see what happens. I don't see the show coming up, gentlemen, and we are live on the channel. Oh, here we are. We are coming up. There is we get a finally is our first comment in the chat. So we are in fact live, and let's just start the show right now, gentlemen. And welcome to episode 3 of Newsshooter Weekly. My name is Jem Schofield, and I am joined by the illustrious Erik Naso and the illustrious Matt Allard. How are you, gentlemen, today?
Joined for the second time
I'm flustered.
today.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know where am I? Where are you?
We've already done about 11 minutes of a show, and nobody's seen it, or some people have seen a couple of little snippets of it. Let's just first run down a couple of things. The west coast of the United States is burning down, and both Erik and I are living in that part of the country. We just had an internet snafu, a glitch in the matrix, where we went live to episode 3. It originally didn't look like it was going anywhere, so we went live again. That went to episode 4, which is next week's episode on Thursday, September 24th. And then we basically just shut everything down, created a brand new episode 3. We're taking this thing from the top. I appreciate everybody who comes in and joins us. And this doesn't happen often, but this is real life. And Live, or now we're live. So welcome. Erik, I know you've been dealing with a lot in the last week. You're sort of in a new space coming to us this week. I am as well. I had to move out from the barn because of the smoke and the fires, and it's just not a space that I could be in. You're in a space right now where you haven't even been able to get your audio all hooked up properly. What has your week been like? No, tell us what's been going on.
Oh, it's been crazy. So first off, sorry about the mic. This is just a prop at this point. It's not really working, so I'm doing the best I can with my laptop audio. But yes, Jem, you are so correct. You and I are in the midst of hell here on the west side of the world, United States. I went on vacation for a little while. I was hoping to get up to Yosemite. That didn't happen because fires started right there about 100 miles away, and you just don't drive into a fire. That's just not a good thing. I have flip-flops and shorts. I don't have any fire gear. I'm not even going to go up there to cover a fire dressed like that. So we had to kind of, shift, and we ended up in the West Coast area of Santa Barbara and Paso Robles. And I just chilled out there for a little while and tried to, kind of try to forget about how horribly smoky it started to get while we were there. But Jem, nothing compared to what you're going through. Several lives have been lost in the Oregon area, lots of homes. In my area, we're just dealing with a lot of forest fires, a lot of smoke. Boy, the satellite shots I saw a few days ago, there was probably only like a tiny little corner up in the northeast area of Oregon that didn't have smoke over it. The entire state of California, all the way moving down the west, was just covered in smoke. So I'm dealing with a little bit of issues right now with my throat. My wife as well. We're dealing with nose and throat issues because we were outside for about a week. And you might not be able to smell it all the time, but there's always those little particulates that get in the air, and they really mess with you after a while. So, but yeah, it's been pretty crazy. Matt, how's it been for you? Because sometimes in Japan things get a little nuts too. You've been kind of calm lately, or what's been going on?
Touch wood, everything's been fine here. And we get the occasional typhoon at this sort of time of the year, but that's sort of started to pass now. So yeah, nothing like what's going on in the west coast of the United States. Our hearts and thoughts go out to everybody there who's been affected. And if your house has been burnt down or you've lost loved ones, we hope you get back up on your feet quickly.
Absolutely. I mean, we're lucky. We have a lot of bags packed just in case something happened, but we've been able to stay here. But we've had air quality index in the high 600s, which is very hazardous. Just starting to reduce to very unhealthy. We're here, I'm back in the house, as it were, because I can't be in that other space. There's many people above me, so hopefully everything will stay quiet for this. But this is sort of the new normal for us, is, we are doing projects and working from home, and we have to just work around sort of the things that exist and do it at the highest quality that we can, considering the situation. So I'm going to keep track of the chat over here. If you have questions for Matt or for Eric, please just put an @Newsshooter before your question, or just a general question that you'd like to have us discuss. And before we really officially get started, I just want Matt and Eric to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about who they are. We didn't have an episode last week because of the fires and the smoke. Eric actually was back, but we could not do it because of the situation, and it was just too much. And Chris, lucky you didn't miss the first half hour. We're redoing it. So you're sort of in the first few minutes of the show. So everything's all good here, and we started it from the top again. So Matt, just tell us about yourself and who you are, and we'll go over to Eric, and then we'll just get right into it.
I'm a freelance DP based out of Tokyo, Japan. I've been in the industry for 31 years now, and I normally specialize in documentaries and human interest type sort of stories, and I dabble in other bits and pieces. So that's basically what I do.
And Eric?
I am a DP for NBC7 here in San Diego, and I work in the creative services department. So I do commercials, basically promotion for the news product and the station image. So if there's a PSA to be done, or there's a new 11 p.m. focus we want to have, or morning show focus, then that's me. That's my game.
Awesome. So lots to talk about this week. We decided that we weren't going to have one particular focus. Next week, that's what the show is going to be about. We're actually going to shift the show to Thursday, the 24th of September, because at 2 p.m. Central Europe summertime, which is 8 a.m. Eastern time here in the United States, Canon is going to announce a new cinema camera on this new Canon Vision platform that they have, so there'll be other content up there. There will be a link to that when we post episode 4 up on the Newsshooter site, but you can just look for Canon Vision, and I don't think you'll find a link to it on the Canon USA website, but I have found it on the Canon Europe website, so you can check that out. And all of the information about this new camera will eventually be up on Newshooter's website, and we will be talking about it just hours after the camera has been announced, and we can all have a big chat about it and what we think about that. And I think it will allow us to circle back and talk about all of the cameras that have been announced in the last few weeks and take a look at sort of the space. We know that the FX6 is also coming a little bit later this year, and while we can't completely speculate about that because we don't have data on it, it will allow us, I think, to give a well-rounded view of where we're going with cameras, at least for the next 6 months or so. So speaking of things where we talk about equipment, there's been an announcement, and it's this, NAB 2021. Gentlemen, I'd like to get your take on this being announced and supposedly happening in relatively early October of next year.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. Not surprising, I don't think, to anybody. But to me, this is a wishful thinking event date. I really feel, my gut tells me that without having a real vaccine for COVID globally, because this is a global event, right? Everybody comes from all over the world to Las Vegas, so it's not just people in America that has to have this vaccine and be COVID free, I guess we could say. I don't know if that's even possible, but we're really going to have a very controlled health with COVID before we're going to get a bunch of people together. So I think it's wishful thinking on their part, but again, they have to plan, so why not do it? And it's also a bit frustrating because IBC is about 4 weeks before, so September, October, that just seems like it's really tight. But again, to me, it seems like wishful thinking.
Yeah, I agree with Eric. I think it's more of a, them setting a placeholder date. So people can obviously, the NAB can book the venue in Las Vegas. Companies can get organized and sort of start making preliminary arrangements to book that in. But again, yeah, as Eric said, without a virus for COVID, I just can't see it happening at this stage. And it's interesting that they've pushed it all the way to October. And as Eric said, it's just a month away from when IBC is supposedly supposed to be taking place as well. And maybe they've sort of done that, and you might think, well, it's a bit strange. Why would you have two major shows that are basically the same within a month of each other? Well, maybe it comes down to the possibility that people may still not be traveling or not traveling in large numbers. So it's almost like if you live in that part of the world in Europe, you'll attend IBC, and if it goes ahead in the United States, you'll attend NAB. So I think that's probably the rationale between having those dates so close to each other. But again, I'm very skeptical as to whether any of these events will be taking place next year.
Yeah, that's interesting to think about that sort of split, and then whether or not they become two slightly smaller shows, because of course most of these companies put all of their resources into IBC and into NAB, and there's a lot of cross pollination or whatever you want to call it between the big companies sending people from Europe to NAB, from the US to Europe to Amsterdam. The other thing that's interesting is that NAB New York, while a much, much smaller show, which has been combined with an audio show to sort of make it a bigger show in November, may go by the wayside in 2021 if this actually happens, because you're not going to have NAB Vegas and NAB New York within 2 weeks of each other in terms of a branded thing. And it'll be interesting to see whether or not in 2021 we see, two Cine Gears in LA and in Atlanta, or none, or just one of the two. So I think it's, as you said, probably too early to tell, but it could change this whole industry in terms of trade shows, and I don't know where we're going from all of this. I mean, CES has already been canceled, right, in January. So and then that's the largest electronics show, at least here in the United States. I mean, it's bigger than NAB for sure.
Sure. Yeah, consumer electronics shows. I mean, that's just gigantic. I went once, and I was blown away by how ginormous it was. I mean, it is overwhelmingly large. It's like going to Disneyland in prime time, right? I mean, you're just wall to wall everywhere you go. It's just there's no place to sit.
Yeah.
But I mean, we have so many more issues at hand too, right? I mean, globally, people are dying, and this is a very, very difficult time. And so we talk about this really small niche of just wanting to be together again, all of them, to see all our friends that we've made over the years, and it's just that tiny little piece that you just want to get some normality again. We all want to travel and see our friends out in other countries, and it's super frustrating and sad. And well, I just hope that 2022, if the vaccine starts being spread out by the end of the year, that it's probably going to take 6 months or so before we all get treatments or whatever they've got for the vaccine. And maybe 2022 we might actually be all together again. Who knows?
Yeah. Matt, just a quick ask from the chat. Could you raise your audio levels just a tiny bit, just to get a little bit hotter? I know you've got to make an adjustment there, but that would be amazing. And as I said before, the chat is supposed to be so you can communicate with each other and also to ask questions. Just put in at Newsshooter there. And then we do have one very important question for Eric, which is, did you have some wine in Paso Robles? Is that how you say it?
Yep.
Did you have wine? Yes. Okay, good.
Absolutely. Paso Robles is a really great area, red wine, and we started having more white wine. I hadn't been there in about 10 years. I was surprised how delicious the wines are. And the tasting rooms and the wineries, they're getting so fancy, they're getting up to that Napa Valley sort of stature. So I'm thrilled about that because, look, it's not that far from here for me. I mean, it's only about 4 hours maybe drive. So not bad. Not bad at all. I'm ready to go back. Actually, maybe I should go this weekend. I don't know.
Maybe you should, with everything that's going on. All right, so let's get into our next subject, which is really just brand new news. Was it today that this dropped? I'm a
Yeah,
little out
today.
of the loop with everything that's going on. So we have the GoPro Hero9. Feelings on this, gentlemen? Who's going to go first? Just tell me. Raise your hand or just start talking, and I can go to a single. Who's it going to be? Come on, kids. Matt.
Eric's going to talk about this one. I was asleep. When this got announced.
All right, go ahead, Eric. You're up.
No, it looks like GoPros are kind of like they're always like, oh, I got to get the new one because they're not super expensive. And they always have just a few more features out a little bit better. So we got 5K, larger stills, improved performance for their smooth cam thing. It looks pretty amazing. So, all in all, it's a pretty nice upgrade. And they're offering this, I guess, is fairly new, this subscription base, but I didn't know really too much about it until I was, posting the article. But they have, for a year, you can get up to 3 brand new GoPros, no questions asked. So if you damage your GoPro, and it costs about, dang it, I think it was like $4 a month, $5 a month for a year, but you have to subscribe for it for a year. Obviously, too good to be true, right? So you're looking at that times 12, $60-$70 roughly a year subscription. That's not bad insurance if you use it a lot. I probably, my problem is with GoPros is I use them for like a little while and then they end up, not being used for a long time. And you also have to buy new batteries all the time. So it has an improved battery, removable lens, which is actually pretty cool. So the new sensor. So it looks like a pretty good upgrade for, I don't know, with the subscription, I think it was like about $400. So it looks pretty good.
Yeah, I also was introduced to that subscription for the first time today. It was the first time I was being exposed to it. And if I read correctly, and I may be incorrect, the camera costs $449 US. But if you subscribe, you can subscribe for a year for $49.99. But you save $100 off of the camera if you have a subscription. So you're getting the camera for $349. You're spending an extra $49. So basically for $400, you're getting that insurance and you're also getting a discount on the camera and you're also getting future discounts on other products in there. Now, normally we would talk about our sponsor or something like that a little bit later in the show, but this is a perfect segue. So I'm going to do it. Why not? Here it is. Kids, Newsshooter has a Patreon, and there's going to be some big changes coming soon. There's going to be something called the Deal Club. Maybe the name will change. We'll see what the powers that be do, but this is what it shows right now. And you're going to be able to select this membership level. If you're an existing member, you'll have to just change your membership. And you will be able to join and get discounts on gear. So I think this is a really interesting thing that in the future you're going to be able to join so that you have access to these discounts. Oddly, sort of like what we're talking about with GoPro, but in a much broader way because it's not going to be based on one particular manufacturer. So just keep your eyes out on Newsshooter's Patreon. Also, really keep your eye out on newsshooter.com because once that's all up and running, there will be more information about it, and I think it's pretty interesting. And we're getting some funny comments. It says that graphic design has Slavic all over it, and if you know who Slavic is, then you'll be in the know. Okay, cool. So any thoughts for you, Matt, at all on the new GoPro Hero 9 at all before we hop on to our next camera victim?
It's interesting because I think like action cams may have sort of, they used to grab the headlines a lot and now sort of they come out and people don't sort of pay too much attention to them. I don't think as much as they used to, I think because of there's so many options out there, particularly not only action cameras, but other people now using, smaller mirrorless cameras in the place of something like a GoPro. But I still very much think there's a big market out there. Maybe not so much for filmmakers, but obviously for people who are doing action sports, people want to take shots of their dogs, their kids, take it into a pool, take it down to the beach. So there's a place for it. I'm just not sure whether you're still getting the value for how much like action cameras are now costing. They haven't really come down in price a lot. We've seen cinema cameras and mirrorless hybrids and things come down in price over the years, but the action cameras seem to have stayed around about that sort of same price level. And considering they're getting sold in such large amounts, it's interesting to see that they haven't been able to make them slightly more affordable.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely some other manufacturers who are making action cameras that are less expensive, but it seems to me that GoPro is sort of pushing forward in terms of feature set and the things that they're doing. I do see it's an interesting market as well, because if you are getting it for $349 plus you're paying for that subscription, you have to weigh, am I going to use a mirrorless camera for a webcam, or am I going to buy a webcam, or am I going to get something like a GoPro Hero9, use it as a webcam and also use it as an action camera? So I think when you're making investments nowadays, it's really important for everybody to be thinking about what Eric said, that you buy the GoPro, you use it a lot in the beginning, and then it goes in the drawer. I probably have 3 of them. But can you multi-purpose a piece of kit? Can you use it for more than one purpose? And, especially with this year and, the financial hardships and everything that people are dealing with, I think it's a real thing to be thinking about. You mentioned mirrorless cameras, Matt. We've got this one that was just announced. This is the Sony A7C. I'd like your take on it to begin with, and then let's go to Eric and let's have a discussion about this thing, if that's cool.
Interesting release. Maybe sort of doesn't grab the headlines with any time in terms of specifications, video-wise at least. But it's it's not aimed at a professional audience. This is an entry-level, full-frame mirrorless camera from Sony. So it's designed for those people who are probably using, the A600 APS-C-sized cameras in the past. A step-up path between this to then going to something like, say, an A7S III. Perfect for vloggers, enthusiasts. Probably makes for a very good web camera, given its autofocus capabilities. Small, lightweight. Basically, I think the thing to look at it is it's normally, I would say this is probably like an A7 III in a smaller, compact sort of body.
Agreed.
I'm not really sure about the price. I think it's probably, from my perspective, maybe a little bit high considering what it offers. But again, I think it'll probably be reasonably popular with a certain, a certain crowd who are looking for a camera that, this meets their needs. Mm-hmm.
Eric?
Yeah, and I kind of think that Matt totally, knocked that out of the park. And the one thing about the camera that, I like the A6000 a lot. I mean, I thought that for its time, that was a great camera. And I used it a lot. I recommended it to several people, and that they've all been real happy with it. Why? Well, because at the time, that was an APS-C camera, and it had a lot of great features and actually shot pretty dang good video. Well, I mean, this camera blows that first edition of the A6000 out of the water. And then, of course, the sequential cameras that Sony came out with got substantially better in that A6000 series. But to have this full frame sensor now, I think that's a really great feature. Now, the only downside to a full frame sensor in a small, tiny body is the optics. You're going to want to get smaller optics for a camera like this. It would be out of control to have, the regular line of Sony Alpha lenses that they have, the big full frame ones on this tiny little body. It just wouldn't work. I mean, that's the wrong lens for the tool right there. But I do see them, if they want to develop more full frame compact lenses, they're gonna open up a whole nother niche with that camera. I wouldn't mind having one. Like Matt said, I think it's priced too high. I think $1,800 for that camera is a lot of coin to call it an entry level camera for people. That's a substantial investment in my opinion. And plus you're going to have to get lenses for it. So, if you are new to a full frame, you're going to spend thousands of dollars. Now, why would you want to buy an $1,800 camera like that when you can jump up to the A7 III and have a much more, bigger body, better features, But the feature set in that camera is still pretty darn impressive. And it has that eye focus, has animal focus. The AF alone is enough to just, kind of make you want it as a pull-out secondary camera sort of thing. But it's an interesting move, kind of expensive. But I kind of feel like I want to play with one. Maybe it might be a little dangerous.
Yeah. It's interesting.
And what does it mean now for the future of Sony APS-C size sensors? Are they going to continue with a line, or are they going to get rid of APS-C altogether? What do you think? What's going to happen down that route?
Wow, that's interesting.
Well, with the A6000 series, how far did they go with that? Like 6,500 or something? They brought out like about 8 of those cameras, I think. And I think it would be. I don't think it'd be a good idea for them to totally withdraw from it. It's sort of but it kind of competes with the Fujifilm cameras a little bit. I would prefer the Fuji X cameras over the A6000 cameras, or 6500, whatever. I think they're just a better camera, and the image is really, really great. But yeah, it would be interesting to see them jump. Like, even Fujifilm, they had to make a decision. Do we go full frame? No, they jumped the shark and went medium, right? So it could be that, maybe they do think that. I mean, Panasonic doesn't, they're saying they don't want to get rid of Micro Four Thirds either, right? So we'll see what happens. I mean, maybe that pricing can go way down. And there's a ton of lenses for that camera, an APS-C for the A6000 series.
Right. Yeah, it's a little bit of a head scratcher for me, and I think the first comment that you made, Matt, it's essentially an A7 III in a smaller camera body, which is not A7 III has been on the market now for quite some time, and to me the thing that when we get into that price point, and those two cameras are not that much different, A7 III and the A7C in terms of price. I really start to think sort of along Erik's viewpoint when you start to think about lenses. But the other thing is that as soon as they announced the camera, the first place I went was to the specs page on B&H's website, and it's an 8-bit camera. So we've got an 8-bit 420 camera, and to me that's the thing that really makes the camera less interesting, because if they had made a compact full frame camera which lost some of the features that the A7S III had, but it had 10-bit 420. They put in an HEVC codec, and they gave us that additional information in the recorded image. I think I'd be far more excited about this camera than I actually am. And that was a big surprise to me, because if they're going to make that jump, and you're saying, are they going to stick with APS-C or not? I think they also have to make the jump to 10-bit with their APS-C cameras. I think that ship sailed. We're not in an 8-bit 420 world anymore when it comes to these mirrorless cameras. And to me, I think that was the biggest surprise about the A7C. And seeing that. So okay, well there we go.
And it won't even output 422 10-bit. It's limited to 420 10-bit on the output. And then strangely enough, they were touting, it's got S-Log2, S-Log3, which are things you really don't want to be shooting with a 420 8-bit internal codec.
Exactly.
Don't even get me started. At 100
Sony's been doing
megabits per
that
second.
for a long time. Yeah, Sony's been doing that for a long time. They were offering the log codecs with the 8-bit. But also, I think both of you guys are nailed it. And Sony is, if I was a devil's advocate here, Sony's going to just say this is their answer. It's like, well, guys, this is a consumer camera, an entry-level consumer camera. We don't really, expect this thing to be a professional camera. And Fujifilm's going to say their APS-C line is a professional camera, and it is. I mean, the optics on that and the camera, it performs very well. So, this is their way of segmenting their product line, and I always wondered if they were going to make a professional APS-C camera to sort of compete with Fuji, but I think that their idea of professional means larger sensor. I don't think they don't really want to compete with Fujifilm in that realm, the APS-C.
No, and I think you could still argue all these years later that in a lot of ways the A7 III, not the S3, but the A7 III is still Sony's best hybrid camera if you want a camera for both stills and for video. The A7S III trumps it for video, but it's a lower megapixel camera, and then you have the A7R. It's interesting to see where they are now with these cameras, and this A7C camera sort of makes that decision maybe easier for some people and more confusing for others. Speaking of cameras, again, but this is really camera software, this is an app, we have a firmware update for FiLMic Pro. So if you're iOS based, I don't know if they have an Android version now, do they, gentlemen? Do you know if there's an Android version?
I don't think there is at this point.
Okay. So this update's really interesting. I use FiLMic Pro. In fact, sometimes I plug it into the ATEM Mini, and I just use my phone as a second camera. And the camera app on an iPhone, it cuts off some of the image. So I use FiLMic Pro, but it had all of these overlays. And so a big thing here is that we're now getting a clean feed from FiLMic Pro with the latest firmware update. Eric, why don't you jump in and give us some thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's a great idea, and this has been the year where everything camera-wise is getting optimized for web use, and I think that makes a ton of sense. The iPhones are, well, let's face it, every release they're getting better and better, and this last model, the 11, is an incredible camera. I don't have that one. I have the SE, and I like it a lot. The camera's pretty good, but it's nothing compared to what you can get now with the new model and the next probably version, the 12, that's going to be out fairly soon. So right now, more than ever, yeah, FiLMic Pro is going to be the go-to, and it could potentially really do damage to how you use other cameras, because the quality is so good and it's so easy to use. The downside to it, obviously, is there is a bit of a shooting problem, especially if you want to set it up for yourself. If you want to shoot somebody else, it's great, but it's harder. The front cameras are generally not as good as the back cameras. That's something I wish the phone companies would just Apple would just give you the highest quality camera you can get on that front, because that one gets used a ton, especially for self-shooting with video and webcam use. You're going to really kind of want something like that. But I'm sure you'll be able to get some sort of return video if you're using a switcher of some kind. But again, I just think it's a really great idea. The more options you have, the better. It's a very easy camera to set up and use as a webcam in tight situations. So, yeah, FiLMic Pro. Yeah. I mean, I need to use it more often. I have the app on my phone, and the nice thing is they haven't charged me for an upgrade. I mean, I've had that app for years. I've never had to pay for a new version. So, hats off to them for just continuously making the product better and not gouging, current customers.
And Newsshooter coming in with the correct information, which is FiLMic Pro is available on Android. And if we take a look at this slide, this supports that, where you can do 4K DCI 60 frames per second on compatible Samsung devices. So so there you go. So it is cross smartphone, as we say. It's cross smartphone compatible. Have you ever used FiLMic Pro, Matt, at all?
Yeah, I've had FiLMic Pro on my phone for quite a few years now, and it's one of those things where you have it there, but I don't tend to use it very often. I sort of forget about it because I think, in some ways it's still quite a sort of like a little niche product. If you're carrying it around with the, specific purpose of wanting to shoot using your iPhone, then it's great. But I find if you're carrying it around and you've got other cameras available, I tend to not use it. It has improved greatly, and as Eric said, it doesn't cost you any more. So once you originally bought it, they've made so many updates and improvements to that. I mean, it's still limited, obviously, to what the actual iPhone itself can do, and the optics that are involved on your phone. And there's still a few things that they could improve on there. It would be great to be able to sort of lock your shutter speed on there. It's sort of, there's a couple of modes there where you can change the actual ISO manually and the shutter speed, but it doesn't seem to be able to lock it. There's sort of some sort of weird thing that goes on there where it constantly sort of changes the shutter speed. So I'm not sure if they're going to work on fixing that. But again, in terms of internal recording capabilities, you can record at some really good bit rates in there, and it can look pretty good. And with the output now over HDMI, it's sure to be used a lot, I think, by people who need to do live streaming themselves inside offices or various businesses where a bunch of people have got iPhones and they can put them together, and with the output, run it into a computer, and they can do some pretty good live streaming.
Second camera, be cool.
Yeah. I'd love to throw it out there. That would be great to do an update on FiLMic Pro on the Newsshooter site at some point. Not that this firmware update's the only thing to talk about, but I do know what you're talking about, Matt, and I'm wondering if they've done updates that fix that shutter problem. I've noticed it in other apps that are designed for smartphone gimbals as well, and maybe part of it is just the API or something like that, but I don't know, and maybe they've solved that problem. Let's jump on to something else here, which is the CinEye 2 or the CinEye Pro version 2. I think this is a start with Matt. Let's get you involved in this one, Matt, and tell us a little bit about it and what this is.
You might have remembered last year at NAB, a company called ACHTEL brought out a very affordable, compact wireless video transmitter. Now, this could just take a signal over HDMI, and there was no receiver involved. This was strictly something that you could just use to monitor on, an iPhone or an Android device, and you could do up to 4 devices. And it had a fairly sort of limited range. You could probably get around about 100 feet out of it, using an app. But it was very affordable. I think it was only a couple $100, and it was very popular for that company. So they've now tried to enter a slightly different space. So this is the CinEye 2 Pro. So it's a lot larger than the original CinEye unit. And as you can see here, it's not just a transmitter anymore. It's a full transmitter and receiver, but it also has that same functionality of you being able to stream to an app using this uses sort of dual band technology. So it uses 2 different forms of transmission, and then from my understanding, what it does is it's combining both of those signals together to produce an image, and using sort of both frequencies to combine to give you the most sort of range and sort of best image on there. So I was actually really surprised by this. I thought it might have been sort of, it mightn't be a very good unit, but I went out and gave it some sort of thorough testing, and I was surprised. It worked really well. I mean, the claimed range, I think, is around about 340 meters or something similar to that. So I think that's around about 1,000 feet. And so I did some tests, and it worked. It worked perfectly. Occasionally, it would break up. If something came in between the transmitter and the receiver. But what really surprised me is that I was actually walking along with the receiver and a monitor, and also my iPhone with the app open at the same time, and I was getting the same distance using the app instead of just on the receiver unit. So that was really surprising. So I could get 340 odd meters out of this and still be viewing it on my iPhone, where there's previously, with most of these app-based Wi-Fi transmission systems, you'd get maybe 100 feet. So really surprising. I mean, I think it's $599 for the kit. There's a lot of competition in this space now, particularly from Vaxis and Holyland. So, but I was actually quite impressed with it. The app could be a little bit better. A lot of these web-based or apps that have the functionality there for monitoring the signal and things are, they could be improved, because you can't sort of change the peaking, and you couldn't do focus punch in and things like that. But if you're just going to give this system to, a producer or people on set or clients or whatever like that, who can then look at something on their iPhone, then it's a pretty good system for the money.
Question, if you're using 2 transmitters, does the app support a feed from 2 different cameras so that you can monitor both of those feeds at the same time, or is it not capable of doing that?
No, you can only take the feed from one camera. You can't put multiple cameras into that.
Okay, so it's not going to be like on an iPad, a solution for a producer or somebody else to sort of have this mobile village where they can feed multiple cameras. It's just single camera
Yeah.
for that type. But could work really well for documentary type stuff sometimes and things like that, I'm assuming.
Yeah, if you want to look at the multiple feeds, then you have to go with something like a Teradek Serve Pro, where you can actually have 4 incoming camera feeds in there and then switch between them and have a look at them. I think that's basically the only solution at this stage that will let you do that.
Copy. And then form factor wise, obviously you had it on a mirrorless camera. Are there other ways to mount it other than just straight vertically? Or can you mount it horizontally? Are there some options there without having to kind of rig it yourself?
No, not really. There's only a single quarter 20 on the bottom of the unit there, and it does come with a couple of sort of quarter 20 to cold shoe adapters for both of them. But as you saw in those photos there, on a mirrorless camera, obviously it's sticking straight up, and it's actually quite a large unit. It doesn't weigh that much, but by the time you put a battery on it, you're changing it. You don't sort of want that sort of center of balance where something's very high going up. So if you needed to mount it somewhere else, you'd have to obviously use a monitor arm or something similar. I think, again, if you were going to put this on a small sized or medium digital cinema camera, then you'd probably want to mount it a different way, probably off a monitor arm or something like that, and have it on the side of the camera.
Copy. Cool. All right. We have a camera that's been on the market for quite some time, which is the Sony FX9. Month early on their firmware release. Is that correct? It came out quite a bit earlier, right, Eric, than we expected?
You know what, to be honest with you, I don't really know a whole lot about this firmware update. This kind of happened while I was running around. I think Matt probably might want to elaborate on the update.
Okay, yeah. So why don't you tell us about some of the stuff? I'm going to have just a few screens come up, but if you can just give us sort of the key things that you think are important for people who already own this camera or who might be looking at buying this camera in terms of features, that would be great.
Yeah, well, as you can see here on the first one, I mean, I can't remember all the features off the top of my head, but I'll do my best here. So the big thing I think normally is there's now a 5K full frame mode. So this is using an oversample from 6K to produce a 5K image that you can record in full frame. And I think also now there is also an S35 4K DCI mode. I think it does 4K DCI in full frame as well, but don't quote me on that because I can't remember exactly what's going on. The firmware, I think, also allows you to now do, I think it's 180 frames per second in a 2K crop. And then, of course, there's this one here, which I'm not the biggest fan of this. So this firmware is actually allowing for the raw output to come from this camera. Now, the problem with this is you've got to use the XDCA FX9. So this is, I think, a $2,500 US additional add-on that you need to buy to be able to get raw out of the FX9. So it adds a lot of bulk and size to the camera. And, I just don't think this is the best solution. I think it would have been much better off with the FX9 if they had have just, somehow been able to take the raw out and be able to record it, on an Atomos device. I can't see too many people spending $2,500 bulking up their camera, just to have the ability to put a V-Lock plate on there and then, get some additional outputs and be able to output the RAW, which, it is outputting 16-bit linear RAW, but again, that has to be converted into, a 12-bit ProRes RAW signal that then gets recorded on an Atomos device. As far as other functionality, I think some of the other interesting stuff is this here, the touch screen.
Yep.
So there's certain parameters in the menu now where you can go in there and you can make changes simply by touching on the screen. As you can see on that slide there, basically anything that comes up in yellow there is you're able to make adjustments by just touching on the screen. Now, this isn't a full touch screen menu. There's just certain parameters you can go in there to make the changes. But I think, very, very handy. It's probably something Sony should have done a long time ago. But adding the touchscreen functionality allows you to make, certain changes to key parameters fairly quickly and easily.
Yeah, and then also to that end, there's also the ability to have touch focus now. So they're basically adding to the camera's capabilities from a touch standpoint, and being able to use that screen more effectively, and for more functionality within the camera. Good. Any well, actually, we got one more camera. There's a lot of cameras this week, and then of course next week we'll have a brand new one to talk about. This one's pretty interesting, and it's sort of going to wrap up the show, except for any questions that might come into the chat. We do actually have a question that comes in from one of the people, which really has to do with usable dynamic range. And there's been some tests that have been done for the FX9 and for other cameras on the market. And what camera companies claim as dynamic range for a camera, it's got 15 or 16 stops of dynamic range, and then what is actually usable. And I want to qualify that, because when we use these digital cinema cameras nowadays, we don't just turn on a camera and just start shooting with it. We choose what our log, gamma curve is or not. We choose our gamut, and these combinations of what we do in these cameras can have a dramatic effect on the captured dynamic range. It's one thing to say that the sensor has a certain amount of dynamic range, and if you're shooting in RAW, well, if you're capturing all of that data, then you can take that, and then it still has to, at a certain point, be converted to a video signal, and we still have to be able to evaluate what the actual dynamic range of the camera is. But what are your thoughts, both of you, on sort of this whole thing? Because it really is something that we chase, and it's really hard to get our heads around in terms of advertised versus usable dynamic range in a camera system.
Well, I think this is very common. You're never going to get, exactly what the company's going to tell you that the camera's capable of. I think it's very rare. Unfortunately, I wish they would just be super honest with it. But also, like you said, we have so many log profiles. The only reason why these cameras are having so much, they can have so much dynamic range is because of these log gammas that you can use. And usable dynamic range, I mean, I don't even know what that means, I'll be honest with you. It's like when you're editing with your footage, do you want to see all the shadows? No. I mean, sometimes, we don't want to see something that's super flat. We want to make certain areas of the shot darker, and be able. So I don't know how, usable dynamic range is kind of, to me, is like an opinion. It's more than I think that it's going to be something you can just say, a camera has X and X. It's always going to look different in the grade. It's always, you're going to want to make it look the way you want it to. Obviously, if you're shooting Rec 709, then your dynamic range is going to be a lot lower because it's Rec 709, right? So even there, I mean, cameras are really good, really good. Like, they're so much better than they used to be. And I think Matt knows, like, what's the normal dynamic range for a shot that's not, considered flat. I think, what is it, like 10 or 11, something in that ballpark. When once it's finally done, once it's graded and it looks a certain way.
Yeah, don't get me started on the subject of dynamic range, because the quoted number at the end of the day means absolutely nothing. Every camera that's out there on the market today has pretty good dynamic range, and if you can't use the dynamic range that camera's got, then you're doing something really wrong. I mean, people forget that most stuff that they're seeing is still Rec 709, which is literally down to 5 to 6 stops of dynamic range. Even HDR, you're looking at sort of 10 stops of dynamic range that's actually getting shown in a final image. So, this whole thing about the camera has 16 stops of dynamic range or whatever, this is, it doesn't really matter, right? I think this argument over numbers is almost sort of pointless, because yes, you can quote any figure you want for dynamic range, but usable dynamic range just depends entirely on your application. But a lot of cases, what we're seeing here is that the most important dynamic range is obviously highlight protection and maintaining your highlights. As Eric said, you don't elevate blacks up in a scene where you want to see deep into shadows and also see outside. So the thing is, a lot of these cameras that come out, they may well have a claimed 15, 16 stops dynamic range, but if you have a look at the charts, all the dynamic range that, you know, majority of the stops is coming underneath middle gray. So they're being, you know, they're being allocated to shadows and below mids. It's not to the highlights, which is the most important, you know, thing there. I mean, there's nothing wrong with doing scientific dynamic range tests. Absolutely nothing at all, nothing wrong with it at all. But, you know, what I do is I just take a camera and then I go and shoot in a situation where it's going to be high dynamic range and see what the camera actually looks like to my eye. That's far more important and more relevant to me than a number sitting on a specification sheet.
That's what I like to see. The feistiness is coming out of the boys from Newsshooter. That's where we're heading with this show. I think, you know, we want to get into that stuff, and I absolutely agree. I think when it all boils down to it, you need to learn how to expose your image properly. You need to learn how to get the most out of the camera you're using. You also need to learn your camera, because we know that some cameras are really, really bad at underexposing your image, and other cameras can hold up a lot better. And, you know, we always define this thing called dynamic range. Well, I think that the other most important thing that you should be learning about your camera is something called latitude. How far can you push and pull the image that you're capturing and still hold that image? And it's one of the reasons that you know, high-end cinematographers and DPs favor that sensor from Alexa, because they can actually light a scene and quote unquote underexpose it, but they know that they have the latitude to be able to push that image where they want it to be. And we know that historically, maybe not with the newer sensors, you haven't been able to do that as much with a Canon sensor. If you underexpose too much and then you try to raise the image, then things are going to go horribly wrong. And Sony's notorious for you needing to overexpose, especially in their mirrorless cameras, in order to be able to hold the image. It's much happier with, you know, adjusting the image down than bringing the image up, which goes back to what you're talking about, Matt. So learn your cameras, learn how to expose correctly. We're not going to talk about that last camera now. Maybe we'll bring it up next week. It's an interesting one because we're basically at our hour, and we've covered a lot of ground. Any last words from you gentlemen for week 3 before we cover just at the end of the show what we're going to be talking about next week?
Yeah, apologies for the technical problems this week and the late start. You know, it's still episode 3, so we're still sorting this stuff out and getting our feet settled in the ground, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So hopefully it'll be getting better as we move forward.
I'll be working on that audio, I promise you guys. But you know, we might end up being over here a little bit more often, but I don't know. We'll see how it goes. Everybody just take care of each other out there. Wear your mask, and you know, don't go to California or Oregon for vacation in the next couple weeks. Just find something else to do.
Yes. And yes, Chris, we waited for you, and really thank you for everybody for your patience with today's episode. We'll be back on a different day next week. We'll be here at the same time, 4:30 Pacific time, but we'll be on a Thursday, the 24th of September, and that is because Canon is announcing a new cinema camera, and we want the episode dedicated to that. We might pull a couple of things from newsshooter.com into that episode as well, especially if it's relevant. And thanks everybody again. Make sure you subscribe, and then keep your eye out on newsshooter.com for this update on Patreon, where there's going to be some exciting stuff happening there as well. Take care. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Eric.
See ya.
Bye.